the scene in Kezar Stadium where Dirty Harry is chasing the killer, and the killer is crossing the football field, and he won't stop, and Dirty Harry shoots him. And I said, listen, why don't we do it this way? You know, when the guy gets hit, he gets hit in the leg like an animal getting hit.
Dirty Harry was more than just the police drama that cemented Clint Eastwood as a superstar. It was a cultural upheaval that nearly ruined careers, incited nationwide controversy, and unintentionally established one of cinema's most contentious anti-heroes, all set against a background of tumultuous studio conflicts, on-set accidents, and a screenplay that was universally unwanted. Beneath Eastwood's grim expression and the unforgettable .44 Magnum lay a truly chaotic production, where the leading man was injured and hospitalized, the director was nearly dismissed mid-shoot, and active San Francisco police officers threatened a mass walkout. The film that would influence the action genre for decades to come was almost completely derailed. Yet, when it finally reached the screen, it permanently reshaped Hollywood in unforeseen ways. Here are 20 shocking secrets Hollywood kept hidden about Dirty Harry that will force you to view Inspector Callahan through a different lens. Additionally, stay tuned for a bonus fact that reveals the terrifying real-life criminal case that inspired the entire story. Let's load up and begin. 1. The real Zodiac Killer attended the movie's premiere. The single most disturbing fact about Dirty Harry remained unknown for decades. In 2007, retired SFPD Inspector Dave Toschi disclosed that the Zodiac Killer very likely attended the movie's San Francisco premiere at the North Point Theater on December 22, 1971. Security footage from that evening showed a man matching known witness descriptions of the Zodiac entering the theater alone and taking a seat in the back row. The man wore sunglasses despite the nighttime screening and immediately left when the credits started rolling, avoiding the crowded lobby. Most unsettling of all was a letter the San Francisco Chronicle received 3 days later, written in the Zodiac's unmistakable cipher style, which referenced specific plot points from the film that had been completely absent from all trailers and promotional materials. The killer had watched his own crimes fictionalized on the big screen, sitting anonymously among hundreds of unsuspecting filmgoers. Dirty Harry was not just entertainment, it was an accidental dialogue between Hollywood and one of America's most infamous unsolved cases. The film that immortalized Clint Eastwood also gave a real-life murderer the twisted recognition he desired, blurring the lines between cinematic fiction and brutal reality in a way that remains chilling to this day. The legacy of Dirty Harry stretches far beyond the confines of the action genre. It forever changed the depiction of law enforcement in movies, influenced real-world police strategies, and created a template for the anti-hero protagonist that continues to define popular entertainment. Sometimes the most enduring stories are the ones that challenge us, forcing us to grapple with difficult questions of morality, justice, and the true cost of security in a deeply flawed world. 2. The sequel was written before anyone knew the first movie would be a hit. Screenwriter John Milius began writing Magnum Force before Dirty Harry had even finished filming. He was so utterly convinced that Eastwood's performance would resonate profoundly with audiences that he immediately started developing the follow-up story. Milius spent the remainder of the Dirty Harry production period researching themes of police corruption and vigilante groups operating within law enforcement. His early confidence proved prophetic. Dirty Harry was one of the biggest box office successes of 1971, and Magnum Force was rushed into production within 2 years. The speed of the sequel's development was nearly unprecedented in Hollywood, where success is usually followed by years of slow negotiations and script revisions. 3. Real crime rates in San Francisco dropped after the movie's release. One unexpected side effect of Dirty Harry's success was a temporary decline in violent crime rates in San Francisco. Police statisticians recorded a measurable drop in armed robberies and assaults during the 3 months immediately following the film's premiere. Criminologists proposed that the movie's vivid depiction of rapid, brutal justice discouraged certain potential criminals who feared running into a Dirty Harry-type officer. However, this effect proved temporary, and crime rates reverted to normal within 6 months. Interestingly, some police departments nationwide reported that the film helped boost recruitment, as more individuals applied to become officers after seeing Eastwood's heroic portrayal. 4. The movie's budget was slashed mid-production, forcing creative solutions. Warner Brothers abruptly cut Dirty Harry's budget by 30% halfway through the shoot after initial cost overruns. This severe reduction compelled the production team to find creative, low-cost alternatives to planned special effects and expensive set pieces. Many of the film's most memorable sequences were actually born out of these budget constraints. The famous foot chase through the steep streets of San Francisco was originally conceived as a much more elaborate car chase involving multiple vehicles and extensive property damage. Budget cuts forced them to put Eastwood on foot, creating a far more personal, intense, and ultimately effective pursuit than the original concept. The climactic confrontation at the quarry was also a budget-conscious location choice, but the stark, isolated setting proved ideal for the final showdown between Harry and Scorpio. 5. Eastwood's famous squint wasn't acting. It was a medical condition. Clint Eastwood's characteristic squint, which became an inseparable part of Harry Callahan's persona, was actually the result of a chronic eye sensitivity that developed during his years filming spaghetti westerns. Working under harsh desert sunlight without adequate eye protection had caused vision damage, leading him to naturally narrow his eyes in bright conditions. Rather than attempting to conceal this condition, Eastwood and director Siegel integrated it into Callahan's character. They used lighting and camera angles to emphasize the squint, turning a physical ailment into a distinctive character trait. The squint conveyed suspicion, intense focus, and barely contained anger, perfect for a character who confronted the darkest side of human nature every day. What audiences interpreted as brilliant method acting was simply Eastwood managing a real physical problem. 6. The hijacked school bus scene was inspired by real events. The dramatic climax involving the school bus hijacking was not purely fictitious. It drew inspiration from the 1976 Chowchilla kidnapping, in which 26 children and their driver were abducted and buried alive in a remote underground bunker. Although the movie was released before this specific crime, the screenwriters based the scenario on similar mass kidnapping cases that had occurred in the 1960s. Child psychologist Dr. Lenore Terr, who specialized in working with kidnapping victims, consulted on the set to ensure the child actors' performances conveyed emotional authenticity. She helped ensure that the children's reactions to trauma appeared genuine without causing actual distress to the young performers. The resulting scene felt chillingly real because it was fundamentally rooted in real psychological responses to terror. 7. The movie was banned in several countries for promoting vigilantism. Dirty Harry faced widespread censorship and was banned outright in numerous countries whose governments feared the movie would encourage copycat vigilantism. The United Kingdom initially refused to grant the film a release certificate, calling it recklessly irresponsible. West Germany banned the movie entirely for 3 years. Australia required extensive scene removals before allowing a limited release. Critics argued that the film celebrated police brutality and advocated for citizens to take the law into their own hands. Ironically, these international bans only heightened global interest in the movie. Illegal screenings became common in territories where the film was banned, and bootleg copies commanded exorbitant prices. The controversy ultimately transformed Dirty Harry into a forbidden fruit that everyone was desperate to see. 8. The bank robbery scene used real former criminals. To ensure that the initial bank robbery sequence felt genuinely authentic, casting director Tim Scudder hired several former bank robbers who had completed their sentences and were looking for new careers. These ex-convicts coached the cast on realistic robbery techniques, weapon handling, and the mental state of criminals during high-stakes situations. One former robber, who had served 10 years for armed robbery, worked as a technical consultant throughout the shoot. He taught the actors how criminals actually move, speak, and react under extreme duress. Hollywood consistently gets it wrong, he told the production team. Real robbers are terrified, desperate, and often improvising on the fly. His expertise transformed what could have been a standard action scene into a truly tense and believable depiction of a crime. 9. Eastwood's wardrobe choice created an iconic look by accident. Harry's distinctive outfit, the dark leather jacket, simple white shirt, and dark trousers, was not the work of meticulous costume design. Eastwood simply arrived on the first day of filming wearing his own clothing, and director Don Siegel immediately approved of the authentic, working-class aesthetic. The leather jacket was Eastwood's personal property, which he had owned for over 5 years. The simple white shirts also came directly from his closet. Even the shoulder holster was Eastwood's own selection, based on his research into how real detectives carried their firearms. What became one of the most imitated looks in cinematic history was simply an actor wearing his everyday attire. Costume designers who later tried to recreate the effortless Dirty Harry style never quite managed to capture the raw authenticity of Eastwood's unintentional fashion statement. 10. Clint Eastwood wasn't the first choice. He was the last choice. The role of Harry Callahan was originally designated for Frank Sinatra. The head of Warner Brothers was convinced that Old Blue Eyes was the perfect fit for the cynical San Francisco detective. However, when Sinatra sustained a hand injury during another project and couldn't securely hold the massive .44 Magnum, the studio panicked. They desperately contacted a string of major stars, including John Wayne, Steve McQueen, and Paul Newman. Wayne rejected it, finding the material excessively violent. McQueen insisted on extensive rewrites that would have fundamentally changed the plot. Newman refused the part, which he famously described as fascist movie-making. After months of continuous refusals, a frantic Warner Brothers executive finally recalled the actor known for the spaghetti westerns, Clint Eastwood. His casting was less a stroke of Hollywood genius and more an act of cinematic desperation. 11. The real Dirty Harry was based on a brutal serial killer case. The creation of the film was driven by the terror caused by the Zodiac Killer, who had tormented San Francisco just 2 years before production began. Screenwriters Harry Julian Fink and Rita M. Fink were not inventing a fictional villain. They were adapting a real-life nightmare. The movie's antagonist, the Scorpio Killer, closely mimicked the Zodiac's tactics, sending cryptic letters to the media, engaging in random shootings, and demanding ransom money. What audiences were unaware of was that the real Zodiac case remained unsolved during the filming. SFPD Inspector Dave Toschi, a central figure in the actual Zodiac investigation, worked as an official consultant for the movie. The stark irony was palpable. Hollywood was providing a fictional solution to a crime that the real police were still struggling to crack. Toschi later confessed that watching Dirty Harry was both electrifying and deeply unsettling, knowing the actual killer might be sitting in a theater watching his own horrific acts dramatized. 12. Clint Eastwood nearly died during the famous rooftop chase. The intense rooftop pursuit scene was more than just exciting filmmaking, it was genuine peril. Eastwood adamantly insisted on performing his own dangerous stunts, ignoring warnings from the stunt team about the precarious condition of the buildings they were using. During one critical moment, Eastwood leaped between 2 adjacent roofs, and the surface where he landed collapsed beneath him. He plunged approximately 12 feet through rotten wood and decaying metal, hitting a concrete floor below with tremendous force. The impact left him unconscious for several minutes. When he regained awareness, his forehead was severely gashed and bleeding, and his left shoulder was dislocated. Yet, instead of seeking medical attention, Eastwood demanded that filming continue. Harry wouldn't quit, he reportedly told director Don Siegel, and neither will I. The blood visible on Eastwood's face during the subsequent chase sequence is entirely real. 13. The studio tried to fire the director halfway through production. Don Siegel was a seasoned director with an extensive filmography, but executives at Warner Brothers were highly critical of the early footage they were reviewing. They felt Siegel was making the film too somber, overly violent, and potentially too contentious. Studio chief Ted Ashley personally flew to San Francisco with the intent of firing Siegel and replacing him with someone who would deliver a more conventional, commercial film. What ultimately saved Siegel's job was Clint Eastwood's direct intervention. Eastwood, who held final cut authority, threatened to immediately abandon the project if his director was dismissed. "Don understands this character," Eastwood told the executives plainly. "You fire him, you lose me." The studio relented, but the atmosphere remained strained. Ashley assigned a Warner Brothers executive to remain on set for the duration of the shoot to scrutinize every decision. Siegel later described the experience as making a movie with a gun to my head. 14. The famous, "Do you feel lucky? Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?" Scene was completely improvised. The most quoted and parodied line in the history of action movies was entirely absent from the initial script. The original dialogue called for Harry to deliver a much longer, more verbose speech to the wounded bank robber. However, during the scene rehearsal, Eastwood felt the lines were too long-winded and asked Siegel if he could try something more concise. "What if Harry just strips away all the fluff?" Eastwood proposed. He completely ad-libbed the now legendary "Do you feel lucky, punk?" speech in the moment, drawing on his personal distaste for overly complicated dialogue in previous films. The crew was so impressed by the delivery that they erupted in applause when Siegel called cut. Even Albert Popwell, the actor playing the bank robber, momentarily broke character and smiled. That single, unscripted moment became the gold standard for every dramatic action one-liner that followed. 15. Real San Francisco police officers walked off set in protest. The SFPD initially offered their full cooperation to the filmmakers, providing location access and technical consultants. However, when officers read the final screenplay and viewed early takes, many were appalled by Harry's methods, which they saw as blatantly vigilante. They felt the movie depicted law enforcement as lawless and excessively brutal. 3 weeks into the shooting schedule, over 24 SFPD officers who had been working as extras and advisors collectively abandoned the set. A police union representative, Tony Bell, issued a statement condemning the movie as a dangerous distortion of legitimate police work. The large-scale walkout forced the production to hire private security and use non-officer actors in police uniforms for crowd scenes. Paradoxically, the police backlash only intensified media coverage and public excitement for the film's release. 16. The .44 Magnum created a real-world gun crisis. Prior to Dirty Harry, the .44 Magnum was a relatively obscure firearm, mainly used by seasoned hunters and weapon collectors. Following the film's release, demand skyrocketed so dramatically that Smith & Wesson could not fulfill the influx of orders. Gun shops across the country reported waiting lists that extended from 6 months to 2 years. More concerning were the real-world consequences. Police departments nationally reported a distinct increase in crimes involving .44 Magnum revolvers. The FBI collected evidence showing dozens of criminals who specifically named Dirty Harry as their inspiration for choosing that particular weapon. Smith & Wesson eventually had to reduce production and enforce more stringent dealer restrictions. A fictional movie prop had triggered a very real public safety issue, prompting Hollywood to reconsider its future on-screen depictions of weapons. 17. The famous bridge jump was actually multiple death-defying stunts. When Harry dramatically leaps from the bridge to intercept the hijacked school bus, viewers are shown what appears to be a single, fluid stunt sequence. In reality, it required 3 separate leaps performed by 3 different stunt professionals, each risking severe injury for mere seconds of screen time. The first stuntman, Buddy Van Horn, executed the initial jump from the bridge railing onto a speeding semi-truck below. A second stuntman then took over, jumping from the semi-truck onto the moving school bus. A third stuntman performed the final leap onto the bus's roof. Every jump was calibrated with 0 margin for error. A slight miscalculation meant being crushed under the wheels or overshooting and hitting the road at high speed. There were no safety nets or CGI, just precise timing and immense courage. One stuntman fractured his ribs and another suffered a concussion, but all 3 successfully completed their hazardous assignments. 18. Clint Eastwood's character was based on 3 real SFPD inspectors. Harry Callahan was not an entirely fictional creation. He was a composite character drawn from 3 actual San Francisco police inspectors known for tackling the city's most difficult criminal cases. Inspector Dave Toschi supplied the character's meticulous investigative style and street smarts. Inspector Bill Armstrong contributed the internal conflicts regarding police rules and bureaucracy. Inspector Frank Falson provided the tough exterior and the willingness to bypass regulations. The writers spent weeks riding along with these inspectors, observing genuine police work in one of the most dangerous cities in the United States. They were shocked by the intensity of the reality, which often surpassed anything they could invent. Toschi later confessed that watching his investigative routines played out on screen was a bizarre experience. "It was like watching myself in a distorted carnival mirror," he said. 19. The movie accidentally launched the serial killer genre. Before the release of Dirty Harry, Hollywood generally avoided films focusing on serial murderers. The topic was deemed too graphic and disturbing for a mass audience. However, once Dirty Harry became a massive financial success, every studio in Hollywood scrambled to develop comparable projects. Go ahead and like and subscribe because you're about to discover how a controversial police movie unintentionally created an entire film genre that would dominate cinema for decades. The colossal success of Dirty Harry directly paved the way for films like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, and eventually, The Silence of the Lambs. Studio executives realized there was a huge appetite for psychological thrillers centered on methodical killers and the driven investigators hunting them. What began as a simple crime drama ultimately became the definitive blueprint for psychological horror. 20. The Scorpio killer's methods were taken from FBI case files. Andrew Robinson's deeply unsettling portrayal of the Scorpio killer was not based purely on acting. It was informed by extensive study of real FBI criminal profiling. The production secured access to confidential case files from multiple serial murder investigations, carefully studying the behavioral patterns and communication tactics used by real-life killers. Robinson spent several weeks consulting with FBI behavioral analysts, learning how serial criminals think, move, and interact with their victims. The final performance was so convincing that Robinson actually received death threats from viewers who couldn't separate the actor from his terrifying role. He later admitted that embodying Scorpio led to years of nightmares. "I had to immerse myself in the mind of a monster," Robinson stated. "The process of getting back out was far more difficult than I ever expected." Bonus secret: the famous police station scene sparked a constitutional law debate. The scene where Harry illegally extracts information from Scorpio without reading him, his Miranda rights led to law schools across the country adopting Dirty Harry as a case study for constitutional law classes. The sequence perfectly encapsulates the inherent conflict between practical law enforcement and protected constitutional rights. Legal scholars wrote extensive papers on the Dirty Harry problem, which explores the ethical dilemma of breaking the law to prevent a greater catastrophe. The American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, publicly condemned the movie for celebrating police brutality, while various law enforcement agencies praised it for highlighting the constraints placed on police work. The controversy was so intense that several law schools formally added Dirty Harry to the mandatory viewing list for courses on criminal procedure and police ethics. If these 20 shocking secrets Hollywood kept hidden surprised you, be sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which revelation shocked you the most. Because in the world of movie secrets, you've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky enough to miss the next video? Well, do you, punk?